Hello, this is Dr. Stansel. In this lecture, I teach you a method for writing your own moral argument. The method I'm teaching you has 7 steps. It's not the only way to develop a good, strong moral argument, but it's the way that I teach my students. I find that it works well with beginning students. Let me ask you to pause the lecture here and read through these 7 steps. And then when you restart the lecture, on the following slides, I'll be describing each of these steps in some detail. You'll be writing your moral argument in response to a moral question, such as, should the drinking age be lowered to 18? So the first step is to take time to reflect on that question. Slow down, sit, and think about the question. I recommend that you review relevant course content. You go online and you browse informational sources like Wikipedia and also op-ed pieces, for example. Now, the last bullet on this slide shows a sample question. Should the drinking age be lowered to 18? And I'll be referring to this example throughout the rest of the lecture. After reflecting on the question and doing some research, it's time to determine your answer. Determine your answer to the moral question. We'll call this your moral view on the topic, and that moral view will serve as the conclusion of your argument. When possible, state your moral view using one of the formats that I've taught. Blank is morally required, blank is morally required when, and so on. And you see these on the slide. To follow through with our example about the drinking age, let's say that I reflect and I do some research and I determine that my view is it is morally required to lower the drinking age to 18. This is going to serve as the conclusion of my argument. So now I do have one piece of my argument. I've got the conclusion. Next, I want to work on getting premises that support my conclusion, and I want you to start with the simple step of just considering your one main reason for this view. So, for example, if I think that the drinking age should be lowered to 18, and I think about my reason, well, why? Why do I think the drinking age should be lowered to 18? Perhaps my reason is many adult responsibilities began at age 18. Well, great, that's a premise. Write it down. Now I have one premise for my argument and I have the conclusion. In the next step, I build my set of premises by starting with the one premise I identified in step 3. And I ask myself, why is that premise true? And I write another 1 or 2 premises that explain why my first premise, which I identified in step 3, is true. For example, to support the premise that many adult responsibilities begin at age 18, you might say people can join the military at age 18. And at age 18, people can be tried for crimes as an adult. Now I have 3 premises. And I want to take a step back and look at my 3 premises and look again at my conclusion and consider whether I have enough to get from the conclusion, to get from the premises to the conclusion. And I might add 1 or 2 premises to close that gap and show the clear connection between my first 3 premises and my conclusion. For example, I might add something like, if someone is adult enough to join the military, which is a serious responsibility, they are adult enough to drink alcohol. Finally, I might want to add, Our standards for who counts as an adult should be fair and consistent. Now I need to look at the premises that I've written so far and check them and make sure that at least one premise is a moral view, moral claim, or moral principle. A moral argument has to have a premise like that. It happens that I already have one here, and it is the very last of the premises that I wrote. Our standards for who counts as an adult should be fair and consistent. We see the word should there, and that's an indicator that I'm probably in moral territory. And then I look at this premise further. It should be what? Should be fair and consistent. These are moral concepts. So here is my premise, which makes a moral claim. It's essential to have that to link your other premises to your conclusion, which is a moral claim. The next step is to write out your argument in argument reconstruction format, putting one premise per line, labeling the premises P1, P2, and so on, writing your conclusion last, and labeling it with a C. And I'd like you to pause the lecture now and read what this argument looks like written out in argument reconstruction format. Next, work from what you just wrote to write your argument out in paragraph format. When you do that, it is a good idea to add a little more discussion to make your paragraph more readable, make it flow, and make sure that the ideas are understandable by a reader. Sometimes when we put an argument in argument reconstruction format, it's too brief, it's too skeletal, it happens too fast. So it can be a really good idea to write the argument out in paragraph format to flesh it out a little further, just to make sure you get your ideas across well. Let me ask you to pause the lecture here and read through how I've done that in this paragraph. Now, by this point, you already have a complete argument. But I think it's a really good idea to take one more look at it and see if you can improve it further. Reread your argument. Can you add additional premises? Often, additional premises can really help. Consider adding a premise or two to explain important ideas. For example, an 18-year-old has the burden of being tried as an adult without the full privileges of adulthood, namely being able to drink. Consider adding a premise or two to fill in gaps between the premises and the conclusion, such as it's unfair to give someone the responsibilities of an adult but not the full privileges of an adult. This is actually not repetitive content. It helps to further develop the ideas that you're working with and make your line of reasoning more clear to the reader. Morality requires we be consistent. That can be helpful and further explains the connection between your premises and your conclusion.